morning.
Yeah.
No doubt many more people will trickle in as they come from thing to thing, but I do want to get us started today and welcome you again to our Kuyper conference and this second plenary. I'm so excited to build on the rich plenary discussions we had last evening and the paper sessions that were this morning and yesterday, and just so rich. And now I'm excited to build on that and to introduce our next plenary speaker, Haejin Shim Fujimura. Haejin is someone that truly embodies Kuyper's vocational and cultural and social vision that Christ has claimed all parts of his creation, that every aspect of life is lived before the face of God. In Kuyper's Stone Lectures, he beautifully articulates the heart of Christ's work in this way. He says, Christ has swept away the dust with which man's sinful limitations had covered up this world order, and has made it glitter again in its original brilliancy. In all of the many multifaceted aspects of her work, Haejin has a keen eye for this original brilliancy that Christ restores. In law, in nonprofits, in art, and in so much more. She's a lawyer and an entrepreneur. She's the managing partner and founder of the law firm Shim and Associates, which was founded on a beautiful vision of cultural renewal for the legal industry and advocacy for the oppressed. Haejin is also co-founder and the CEO of Embers International, where she leads the strategy and engagement that fuels Embers' growth and vision, and is the co-founder and president of Academy Kintsugi, and with her husband leads the movement of beauty and justice. She serves as a team leader in the advocacy and mobilization team of the International Justice Mission, one of the largest or the largest anti-slavery organizations in the world. And she served on the board of a number of nonprofit organizations. Haejin's voice and her wisdom at this conference, especially on this theme, is a natural fit. She embodies in her work and witness seeking out broken places as a witness to and as a participant in God's work of repair and reconciliation, celebrating and delighting in those places where they are found and calling others alongside her in this faithful work. What a gift to have you with us here today. So please join me in welcoming Haejin Shim Fujimura, speaking today on beauty and justice, a path into new creation. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for that introduction. And I am really honored to be here in the midst of brilliant minds. I am not a scholar, but I'm a practitioner of law. And today I have this honor to present this idea of intersection between beauty and justice with a focus of what is law and what does it mean to practice law. And some of you in this place have been my teacher, actually, for this Kuyperian idea of living out our faith in public space. As far as I can remember, the first time I felt God's calling for me to be a lawyer was when I was in third grade. And it's quite funny that this year's Kuyper Prize winner, Makoto Fujimura, my beloved husband, he often talks about how everyone was an artist until third grade. And then somebody told us that we're not. So I was actually in an art class with an assignment to paint with crayons who I wanted to become when I grow up. And I remember painting a judge in judge's black robe on a judge's bench with a gavel. And of course, I had forgotten all about that until I graduated from undergrad. And at the time, I felt really compelled to be a lawyer and an advocate. And so looking back, it was deeply rooted in my DNA when God created me that I had this desire to be a lawyer, to be an advocate. So I really needed to learn what this thing that I'm called to practice, law. I didn't know any lawyers or judges, so I had to just go straight to God and ask him what law is. And surely it's a set of rules and regulations that govern our world, But I really wanted to know how God views law. And if everything good is from God, then is also law from God? And if so, when was it first given to us and why? And in my gut, even in my early 20s, I just had a sense that it probably was not when we received the Decalogue. Because I couldn't imagine this world being lawless as a creation of God before the Decalogue. So I'm going to take you back to Genesis 1 and 2. And this is such a familiar passage. So please bear with me. In God's creation, God brought forth form out of formless and filling from void. During the first 3 days, God created the forms, the structures. God created the light from darkness, creating the structure of time. God set the boundary between light and darkness. God created expansion, separating water above and water below. So we have the structure of space. And God created dry land and vegetation. So we have diverse geological structure. And during the following 3 days, God filled the forms and the structures by creating sun, moon, and stars, which are agents that reflect light and have the authority to rule the day and the night. And he also created the birds and the fish and the animals to fill the water and the sky and the dry land. And to the birds in the sky and the fish in the water, God commanded them to be fruitful and multiply. That is God's blessing of abundance and flourishing. With this command, God showed them how they could flourish in this very diverse environment with one another. The sun and the moon are to rule the day and the night, and the fish is to live and multiply in the water, and the vegetation is to become food for the animals. Although these were not written, these rules clearly were understood, agreed upon, and followed by the all creation. And these spoken rules set forth their authorities and boundaries with one another. What about when God created men? At the time of creation, God's relationship with men was clearly established. God is the creator, and the men, we are the creatures, who are given the lifelong work of being fruitful and multiplying and filling the earth and stewarding it. In order for men to accomplish this joyful work, God gave specific authority to men as an image bearer of God to steward the fish, the birds, and the animals, the insects, and all the earth. God wanted men to be his agents, caring for his creation for flourishing. And being an agent happens to be a legal relationship. There is this principle, God, who gives to an agent of his choice certain power and authority that belong to him. That is what I call the very first power of attorney in human history. There you go. At the same time, God declared man's authority over the earth so that the earth understood to be cared for by man, who is an agent of God. This power of attorney was well informed to all creation that are subjected to this authority. This power of attorney was well informed, and lawyers will say that a notice was properly given. And this power and authority given to men was not to be abused or to be used for men's benefit alone, but to be stewarded for the benefit of the entire creation. That is the intent of the principle. Since the power and authority originally belongs to God, who is the principal, It should be used according to what God would do. You cannot go beyond what is specifically authorized. And God gave men the responsibility to work and keep the garden where the man was placed. And God graciously created a beautiful space for men. God gave men the authority to name every living creature. And God also gave the mankind the right to eat from every plant and tree as their food. However, as we know, that this right was not unlimited, but came with a restriction, a carve-out provision. Men were not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This is the first set of law. This law clarified the relationship between men and the earth, and between men and women, and between man and God. And this law gave authorities and restrictions and set forth the rights and obligations. And without this first set of law, none of God's creation could flourish. And instead, it will lead to chaos, brokenness, and ultimately death. Unequivocally, when the first set of law was fully followed, there was fullness of God's glory. His beauty was manifested in every member of his creation. This law was good. This law was beautiful. And this law was pre-fall of man. Under this law, the creation enjoyed the beautiful, orderly, flourishing state, which we call shalom. And unfortunately, as we know, this shalom that the creation enjoyed in Garden of Eden was not everlasting because Adam and Eve broke the law by eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And sin entered the world, and everyone started to create his or her own law, imposing their view of what is good and what is evil unto others, leading to breaking all relationships, including our relationship with God, with one another, and with the earth. To restore shalom, Jesus Christ, our great advocate, came and died on the cross and resurrected, conquering sin and death. By this, Jesus fulfilled the law to restore all relationships. In Matthew 5:17-18, Jesus said, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass from the law until all is accomplished." And of course, this may be a very familiar story to you, but it was a groundbreaking revelation to me as a young college graduate. The fact that God created the first set of law at the time of his creation of the earth. And this fact led me to the next examination. What about our law of today? First of all, I did not know that there are so many areas of law. There's such a diversity of law that covers essentially all spheres of our world: economy, environment, education, health, and beyond. But there's one commonality. In every area of law, there's some type of relationship. For example, employment law covers the relationship between employer and employee. Contract law covers the relationship between the contracted parties. Other laws govern the relationship between buyer and seller, debtor and creditor, government and its citizen, merchant and customer, doctor and patient, parent and child, and so on. And all of these laws define the roles of each one in the relationship and set forth their rights and obligations and authorities and boundaries. Under these laws, there's no one whose authority is limitless and whose obligation is without certain rights. These laws provide the guidelines as to how we should steward the power, authority, and resources well for one another in this complex world. And I realized that God deeply, deeply cares about all these relationships because I was examining what law is. And then the laws are given to us as a gift. The US lawyers, where I'm from, generally characterize ourselves as either a litigator or a transactional lawyer. One deals with a dispute, the other deals with a transaction. So criminal law, civil litigations will be dispute, mergers and acquisitions, starting a company, adoption, gaining a citizenship in Canada will be all transactional. And I happen to practice both a little bit. When the law is properly applied and enforced, it does two things powerfully. One is to rectify a broken relationship so that the wrongdoer can be restrained and the victim can be restored. This is about restoration. Two is to help the parties to enter into a new or renewed relationship. This is about stewardship. Therefore, the law is a gift of God that shows us how to store and restore our relationships in all spheres. Okay, with that, wait a minute, scholars out there. Doesn't this sound awfully like the words that appear throughout the Bible? Mishpat and tzedakah, translated into justice and righteousness. Mishpat and tzedakah, I think it can be spelled in different ways too. And these are the two words that describes what is central to the heart of God. As Psalmist says in Psalm 89:11, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you. Justice and righteousness are like twins, inseparable friends, and they show up together more than 50 times in the Old Testament alone. Mishpat is known as rectifying and restorative justice. It means punishing wrongdoers and caring for the victims of unjust treatment. However, this concept is not as simple as it seems, because it requires us to go out of our way to advocate for the vulnerable and change the social structure to restore the victims. Jeremiah 22:3 says, do justice and righteousness and deliver from the hand of the oppressor him who has been wronged. And do no wrong or violence to the resident alien, the fatherless, the widow, nor shed innocent blood in this place. This cannot be accomplished without considering both a micro level individual intervention and a macro level social transformation. Once a person is wronged and needs restoration, we cannot possibly go back and fix what happened. Fracture has been made. As an international advocate, I've been involved in anti-trafficking work for over 2 decades. When a child from an impoverished community was trafficked into a brothel, this child has been wronged in an unspeakable way. And her life has been fractured and shattered into pieces. What does Mishpat look like for her? When the child is rescued from a brothel, it's just a beginning of her journey of Mishpat. We'll finally see Mishpat when this child is not only free from violence and healed from trauma, but she is now renewed and empowered to be what she desires to be. There was one young girl that was rescued from a brothel in India. At such a young age, she experienced tremendous pain and suffering, physical abuse, shame, betrayal, pain, and poverty. When she was rescued, our rescue team asked her this question: now that you're free, what do you want? And this is a rather strange question for someone like her in her community, because she was never given an opportunity to even think about her desire. Is it even okay to have a desire of my own? And normally, a young person in her situation wouldn't even know how to understand this question, let alone answer it. But this girl, by God's grace, had an answer for us. She said, I want to be beautiful again. This journey from injustice to beauty is called kintsugi. And love is patient. This journey is called kintsugi, the theme of this year's Kuyper conference. This ceramic was once broken, but instead of being thrown away, it was made new, not by hiding the fractures, but accentuating the fractures with precious gold, making this ceramic more beautiful and more valuable than the original. And this happens to be my favorite kintsugi, being held by my favorite hands of my favorite artist. In Japanese, kin means gold, and tsugi means to mend or connect. Mending and connecting broken pieces, what would have been thrown away, with precious gold. In our culture, in our Western culture, when we fix a broken object, we try to hide the broken part and make it look like the original as if nothing happened to it. But we know very well that we cannot turn back the time. In kintsugi, we do not fix the fractures, but instead we make something new out of those fractures. So every fracture is an opportunity to make something new. It is contrary to our pursuit of perfection and efficiency. In Japan, when a valuable teaware breaks, the tea master's family will often hold on to those fractures for a long time before giving them to a kintsugi master to mend it. Sometimes they will hold on to them for generations. This is called beholding. The tea masters will behold the fractures, the broken pieces, the chipped part of the ceramic, and spend time with them until imperfection looks beautiful. And they imagine what the broken pieces could become. And finally, they're mended with precious gold and lacquer into a more beautiful and more valuable vessel. When they're mended, the kintsugi vessel is not only a restored ceramic vessel, but a co-creation with the original maker of the ceramic. And that co-creation is through brokenness, pain, and extravagant resources. The idea of restoration sounds really extravagant because you will actually spend more money to mend it than the original price of that vessel. But that is precisely what the Lord requires of us when we seek mishpah, because that's how he has mended us. All of us have experienced this kintsugi because Jesus Christ, the Son of God, poured his precious blood into the fissures of our broken life and made us into a new creation. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, in Christ, we are a new creation. Kintsugi is a powerful metaphor for mishpah. As we seek beauty through the brokenness, not just addressing the problem, but creating new opportunities for flourishing. The fragments of what has been broken through injustice are held together, bound together, and become a more beautiful and more valuable co-creation, which leads to new creation. The other word for justice in the Bible is tzedakah. It is often translated as righteousness in English. And when most modern people see the word righteousness, we tend to think of it in terms of a private, personal morality. But tzedakah refers to day-to-day living in which a person conducts all relationships with fairness, generosity, and equity. Tzedakah refers to a life of a harmonious, beautiful relationships. It is much more interpersonal term of stewardship. We know that God loves mishpah and tzedakah. And when they are in place, the earth is full of God's unfailing love, according to Psalm 33:5. When God put together mishpah and tzedakah intentionally, these twins, inseparable friends, God is essentially saying that the injustice that the poor are suffering, the broken system the minority people group are experiencing, the vulnerable people who have been cheated, the disadvantages that the single mothers, the elderly, the disabled, what they are experiencing, their problems of injustice are actually our problem. The only way that we can truly seek justice and love mercy is when someone else's problem becomes my problem. And that is what it means to be an advocate. What would happen if lawyers truly understand the meaning of law and what it means to seek justice? That we understand that the law is a gift of God that shows us how to store and restore our relationships in all spheres of life. How does that look like when lawyers do mishpah and tzedakah in our daily practice? What does lawyering look like for a follower of Christ? Even as a young person in my early 20s, when I was called to be a lawyer, I had the hunch that it had to mean much more than praying for my colleagues and clients, which is also important. As a practitioner, I love the Bible verse from Philippians 4:8-9. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. Law, as God intends it to be, is to seek and practice what is true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, and commendable. And our legal practice is and should be excellent and praiseworthy. As a commercial litigator and business law attorney myself, I counsel companies and business owners in their daily business dealings so that they can have successful business that creates many opportunities for their employees and the economy at large. And I love when my client asks me to draft a contract for them, because it is an opportunity for me to create what I call a beautiful contract. For example, let's take a situation where a company hires a restaurant to provide catering service for its clients. Simple contract. Most of the time, the company and the restaurant respectively will think about what they can get the most out of this business relationship. A lot of times, the most benefit at the expense of the other party is what each party is seeking. And inequitable power dynamic often plays a significant role in contract negotiation. We live in a broken world where that seems to be a norm. Sometimes the parties will be very reasonable towards each other and come to an agreement of mutuality. And when a mutuality of terms is reached, it seems quite successful and remarkable. But I believe our God of mishpah and tzedakah expects and teaches us something more different. What if each party begins to think about stewarding their relationship and considering the other party's needs as their own needs? What if the company, instead of asking for more from the restaurant, begins to ask what the restaurant needs to be excellent at their service? What if the restaurant begins to ask about the company's needs before demanding its own rights? What if we have a contract in which not only a mutuality is achieved, but also each party looks after the other party's interests, with, of course, with the wisdom of responsibility and boundaries. Lawyers can help our clients get out of the scarcity mindset and live in the world of abundance. Then, God's greatest commandment to all of us, to lawyers' clients, that commandment of loving your neighbors is lived out in this business relationship. And it will inevitably result in a flourishing long-term business relationship of tzedakah. I call that a beautiful contract, a new creation contract. Therefore, lawyers have a significant role to play in bringing both mishpah and tzedakah in our broken world. We know God deeply cares about justice and commands us to seek justice. For lawyers, this command is God's invitation for us to partner with Him, to co-create, to be a maker. This kintsugi in our daily practice, in restoring and sorting our clients' relationships. And they'll be contrary to the normal of this society, truly. But it will ultimately bring shalom into this world as we eagerly await the return of our Lord Jesus Christ, our great advocate and counselor. What God has required each one of us to do, to seek justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God, is a lifetime commitment that requires radical and extravagant love for our neighbors. Sugi of kintsugi also means to pass down to the next generation. The question that I bring to God these days is, what would I pass down to the next generation of the young lawyers? I hope my colleagues and I will not pass down the distorted understanding of our profession, but we'll pass down a beautifully mended practice of co-creating with God and restoring and sorting our clients' relationships in all areas of law. I hope we have the courage and wisdom to identify broken laws, and rather than complaining about it, behold them, and create a more beautiful and more valuable set of laws that we can pass down to the next generation. I have been a lawyer for almost 20 years. After learning about Kuyper and public theology, I started my law firm because I saw such brokenness in our legal industry. At the time, some of my colleagues were leaving legal practice, not because they didn't like practicing law, but because their place of work was toxic and broken. Unethical billing practice, inequitable evaluation and rewards, imbalanced work and rest, a lack of clarity as to the way of the law. The cracks were severe, and I spent almost 8 years beholding them, lamenting over them. And finally, when I was able to see those cracks as an opportunity to make something new, I left my old firm and started my own. This is a set of 8 core values of my law firm, showing how we practice law. It is displayed in our lobby as well as on our website. What lawyers offer as their legal practice, what we do, is easy to explain. Litigation, transaction, business law, matrimonial law, etc. But if we are truly practicing law coram deo, in the presence of God, it is important to tell our clients how we practice law. My law firm is not a faith-based company, but these core values are deeply rooted in the founder's faith and vision for this profession as co-creation with God. It is a kintsugi law firm. It is a new creation law firm, founded in and practicing as much as possible God's abundance for this world. Recently, we expanded our space and created a beautiful conference room. in our office, which we call estuary, we fill the space with beautiful art and fragrance. We represent not only Mako's art, but also 10 other artists. And in this gorgeous space, I invite some angry people, people whose relationship have been broken, people who have been cheated. And I have them sit down and discuss resolution, believing that beauty that surrounds them can invoke what is true and good in them, humanity at its best. A desire to restore, mend, and co-create for the future. And also in this gorgeous space, I also regularly sit and lament over injustice around the world, trying to share the weight of God's burden. As I'm called to be an advocate and counselor and advisor, the 3 characteristics of lawyers. And I lift our imperfect world to our perfect God, the ultimate Kintsugi master, and ask him to shine his light through the cracks. I want to show you some visuals that is a culmination, in my opinion, of beauty and justice. And this is called Yobutsuki. It's another form of Kintsugi. Kintsugi masters sometimes will take fragments of different plates, different vessels, because the broken vessel is too severely fractured that you need another piece to have it mended. And they will take a piece from 2 different nations that are in conflict, like this one, North Korea and South Korea. And they will create a beautifully mended new creation. This is a plate that finds island Pakistan, India, Turkey, Kenya. And I believe this is possible in our legal practice as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for those beautiful words and these amazing visuals of what this looks like. I can't help but think of the language of Psalm 145 as you beautifully tell us what Sugi means. One generation will commend your works to another. They will tell of your mighty acts. And today you've given us a wonderfully big picture of God's mighty acts of justice and beauty. So thank you. We have time now for questions and conversations. No doubt in all of these rich ideas, there's much to talk about. We have a little bit of time now to start digging in. So your questions and conversation as we've heard this beautiful testimony of God's beauty and justice. Yeah, Jerry.
Thank you. I find it striking that this conversation or this presentation is made in the Harris building, because I would maintain, I have taught in New Testament theology, New Testament exegesis. I would maintain that the word charis and charitas is never far from the word mishpat and zedekah, the concept of grace. They certainly inform the other concepts. And I so appreciated your conversation also because I recall going to I did a funeral for a lawyer. And one couple at a funeral, they were at the funeral because they came into his office and wanted a divorce. And instead, he convinced them that they should continue on in marriage. So talk about kintsugi, talk about restoration, right? It was delightful to see them there and coming close to the Lord, also because of the witness of that particular lawyer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful presentation, Haejin. Again, I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about your art of beholding in law and in politics. You had this beautiful picture of someone sitting very quietly and peacefully, beholding. And I thought, in order to behold the fractures, and this is sometimes the criticism that I hear from my Christian students about law. They say it's too argumentative, right? We don't want to litigate because that's unchristian. It's too loud. And it struck me that maybe, law and politics in particular, the art of beholding would be a lot louder, than that is in order to establish, well, where are the fractures? And maybe it will take generations to establish them. I think about, the profoundly incomplete work of Reconstruction in the United States of America after the Civil War. Generations, those fractures were passed on without being fixed. Still to this day, work continues of peace in this. That's not quiet work, and sometimes that turns Christians off because I think we like the picture of quietly beholding more than the angry people in your boardroom establishing where are the fractures, what would it look like to mend.
Right,
Here's what
wow.
I found on the web.
Professor Rob, please just ask Wikipedia.
Siri knows.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord, for giving before we talk about lament. I think one of the essential part of being a Christian as a follower of Christ is to regularly lament over the brokenness of this world. And brokenness that is the micro level individual relationships that is part of our daily practice for our clients, but also the broken system. But I think the reason why we need to kind of behold, sometimes for a long time, sometimes for generations, is because it takes that much time for me to understand that fracture, first of all. Sometimes we just kind of want to have a quick fix. That's also contrary to the kintsugi idea, because we want to fix it, cover it, and then move on. But we know from the pandemic that we know we can just move on. We can move forward, but it takes time for us to really behold that fracture, to one, understand it, and to see all the sides that is around it. In a kintsugi metaphor, we had this a beautiful cup that one of our instructors of Academy Kintsugi brought, and he wanted to mend it because it was mother's cup and it had a significant meaning to it. So as he was mending it, he realized that the fracture that he sees from outside of the cup is actually different from the fracture that is inside of the cup. They look different. So can we consider all those fractures and really understand what this fracture is? And in kintsugi practice, we sometimes also name the fracture itself, the chipped part. What does that represent to you? What does that look like to you? And that's just an exercise. But can we really name the fracture? We understand it enough to do that. And then we behold, because we have to be able to see that as an opportunity to make something new, rather than being angry about it. Yes, I think we need to have a holy anger, but we can't be just angry about it and complaining. Because when we have a problem, fracture, we can choose to either complain or create. Which one are you going to choose? But the regular lamentation is what I think God really calls lawyers to do, which we don't do enough. Because we get to see the brokenness in a kind of daily practice. That's what we do. We have to hold on to them. Even when we do transactional law, we see the obstacles all over. So for one example, we have anti-trafficking work in America that I'm part of. And we have all these kind of a programmatic structure that is for the foreign-born woman who's been trafficked into America. And we have rescued her and we have walked with her for restoration with counseling and vocational training. It's ready. Like we are ready to reintegrate her into the society. For her to be empowered in that way, she needs a job that can sustain herself, right? So she doesn't get re-trafficked and there is all these temptations and dangers around her. And we have employers lined up to provide that job for her. but she doesn't have the legal authority to work in the United States. Because she wasn't a legal immigrant, she was trafficked into America. So this is the legal structure that is not perfect, it needs to be mended. And we have to lament over that. And it takes a long and hard journey of advocating for them to make sure that this group of women can have a legal authority to work in the United States when they're under this kind of circumstance. There are provisions out there, but it's not fast enough, it's not widely available. So I think that's one about lamenting. And I think for Christians and Christian students to be, it's really hard. I get this question all the time, and I actually love this question where students will come up and say, I really want to practice mergers and acquisitions, but I'm Christian. How can I do that? I feel like I have to do human rights law. But of course, my presentation was all about we need follower of Christ in all aspects of law. But in terms of litigation, which I actually practiced heavily for these 20 years, and I actually litigate over 500 cases. And what I've learned throughout that process, throughout that training and the practice is that you actually, to be a great litigator, you have to be more like Jesus. That's the only way that you can be an effective litigator. People think that we have to be aggressive to be the best litigator. And that is actually the distorted view of lawyering that the world teaches us. You actually need to have more grace to be an effective litigator because as you all know, you need to actually speak softly for people to pay attention to you, then speak really loudly. And this is a type of grace when my adversary, my counterpart, will be yelling and shouting to present his argument. Can I take that and not be intimidated and stand my ground, but present my case in a most effective, gracious way without yelling back? Because our temptation is that I want to yell back because you know what? I am right. But Jesus, I don't think he ever negotiated down who he was, who he is. Because he always says, I am the Son of God. He never tried to persuade people of that, right? So he was always assertive, but he didn't have to be aggressive in the kind of negative way. So if any of your students want to be a litigator but have a hesitation, please let me talk to that person.
Wonderful. More questions?
I do have a mic. I think that's working now.
Oh, okay.
Now I'm going to be loud, forced to be loud, not meaning to be aggressive. My understanding is that in the Canadian legal system, specifically the criminal legal system, the Crown is the prosecutor, and the victim of a crime, they might have to testify, they might be able to give a victim impact statement, but they are not really all that directly connected with the justice supposedly that is dispensed. How can Canadian Christian lawyers seek to do justice when their victims, the victims are so separated from the legal system that is supposed to be helping?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think we see that in other legal systems as well. I don't practice criminal law. However, I think what criminal law provides is the more of a restraint, right? So when in US system, at least, is a crime against the people and not directly that person. And of course, that person, one individual or a group of people are the victims. The prosecution is people against the perpetrator, the criminal. However, I think we also need to have that in this God's abundant world, that law plays a part, but not the whole part. So even in the restoration process, that's where we need to have the counselors, we need to have a civic agencies, we need to have our churches come alongside for that kind of restoration work. It takes more than one area, one entity, one sphere to actually have this mishpah accomplished. So, but lawyers see this kind of brokenness so much that they can certainly be an advocate. And I think, you know, in a macro level, for a civic society to have the kind of restorative agencies for the victim, we're gonna need the support from the government, right? We're gonna need the funding. We're gonna need legislation in place that will support that kind of effort as well. So in a larger part, it may not be the criminal prosecutor, right? But it could be the lawmakers and the policymakers who are lawyers can play a big part in that.
We have time for maybe one or two more questions. Jonathan.
Thank you very much for this very interesting and informative talk. And I actually want to talk about that image up there and ask a question because in our morning session, one of our presenters was talking about not only riffing on the idea of kintsugi, but also the issue of generational sin and we were kind of steering into the question of theodicy and the problem of evil and what happens with genocide. And even as I look at this image here, I'm thinking about what is, and Mako might have some thoughts on this as well, I realize. What is the place of sitting with the brokenness over a long span of time? Rob talked about the issue of race in the United States, indigeneity as we experience it here in North America. What is our role? I know my temptation is to want to make it beautiful. But what does the art form teach us about living with the reality of it not being satisfied in this lifetime? Thoughts?
Oh, big question. Marco, you wanna come up? Mind you, he does this to me all the time.
So she litigated over 500 cases. How many have you lost? So you want her on your side. Let's go back to your question. You wanna talk about Shauna?
Oh, yeah. So just recently, we had this privilege of doing kintsugi with the survivors of Columbine High School massacre. And if you remember, that's 24 years ago. We just had the commemoration a few weeks ago. And we were there on Sunday, heading towards that Thursday of 24th commemoration. And we had a woman who lost her father at Columbine, a woman whose brother was killed at Columbine. We had a teacher who survived and just carry all that weight all these years. And we had a survivor.
Who was a police officer.
Police officer, yes. And we had a survivor, actually he's well-known, Patrick, who was shot 3 times, including her head, was paralyzed for a long time and survived. And he now is a financial advisor. He came with his daughter. And we were doing kintsugi together with them. And it's been 24 years. But they needed to do this in a way that they couldn't, some of them, I think half of them, couldn't finish. Although they had the time to finish and completing the kintsugi vessel. They couldn't, and they actually didn't want to. And they wanted to bring the mending process, this vessel and the process of being mended home. And throughout that week, as they are looking forward to that 24th year, continue to mend. And I think that's what we need to do. And I think when you understand the beholding process is really critical, and again, that's contrary to the norm of the society, contrary to what we want to do right away. But that beholding time will allow us to actually look at these fractures until we understand them to be beautiful as they are. And this is gonna sound controversial because we are not saying the trauma, like what happened, the injustice itself, we're not saying that's beautiful. But no matter what happened to us in this world is still beautiful. And that's a very painful process. And to be able to sit with that takes a lot of courage, I believe. And so I think that's why, love is patient. And that's the very first characteristic. And I think deep down in God's heart, God sees that beholding to be critical.
So for the 20th commemoration of Columbine High School, I brought a kintsugi bowl given to me by a kintsugi tea family who allowed me to bring this very important bowl to present to the high school, and it is there today. Kintsugi bowl that was Korean bowl. Remember in 16th century Japan invaded Korea and continued to be the aggressor. So I keep apologizing. But yeah, this is North Korea. Yeah, and by the way, this Yobitsugi, you notice the crack is the geographical border. Isn't that incredible? So I brought this kintsugi bowl, Korean bowl, brought over to Japan, served in high tea, broken later, and 3 generations after mended. And I was explaining this to the survivors of Columbine High School and had them hold this bowl. One of the parents said, I can feel the trauma in this bowl, and yes. And I said, some traumas are not possible to even think about mending in a generation. And I hope that as we move forward, it's been 20 years and people want to move on. And yet the survivors are still beholding the fractures. And I think we need to remember that. And every time there's gun shooting in America or elsewhere, the trigger, it's re-triggered. And so they go through it all over again. And these people are amazing because they sat there throughout the process of doing kintsugi, about 3 hours. And without saying anything, they were able to process their pain directly with what they're doing with their hands. You could see it, and you could see what my friend, a clinical psychologist, says, when you men do kintsugi, actually the neurons start to rewire. And you could see that because, when you create a safe place, and it was a very honest, response for 2 of the participants to say, I'm intentionally not finishing this today because I need to do this week. Thursday is going to be hard. 24 years. And so this is, I think, part of trauma, generational trauma that today, unfortunately, we have to continue to mend. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Haejin, and also Mako, for these wonderful insights. There's so much more that we could talk about, that we could say, that we would love to no doubt hear from both Haejin and Mako, but we are going to leave you wanting more. And we have much more to offer. But for now, what we have to offer is God's generous abundance in food. So before we go and break for lunch, please join me in thanking Haejin one more time for his wonderful. picture and a small taste of the deep, deep goodness of our God, who is a God of restoration. And now we can also taste God's provision in lunch. So we will break until 1:30. Lunch is right out those doors in the back. And we'll rejoin at 1:30 for paper presentations in here once again.